Hello and welcome. This is Kaya and Keegan in the basement of the clock tower.
This is a special episode.
We are here with Dr. Dwight Lucas. How are you today?
Good.
Good.
How are you doing?
Good.
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 Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lucas has been integral on the Danville Area Community College campus in teaching race relations and African American culture in a variety of ways.
We brought Dr. Lucas down here today because somebody in the diversity team said, hey, this professor taught a really interesting class, and I think that it's really prominent in this month in specific. Mm-hmm. It's something that we should be talking about this month. And so I think you should bring him down there for maybe, some type of episode. And we thought that the right thing to do and to use our platform is for you to educate us and teach us something new that we don't know.
Yes, and all our listeners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so during this fall, you taught a free 3-credit African American history course, and it did cover things, and I read about this, and so you did cover things from African American slaves all the way until the Black Lives Matter movement, correct?
Right. Even before slavery.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, like ancient Africa and stuff like that. Yeah, all the way up until, recent times.
Gotcha. So do you want to, kind of talk about that class a little bit, what it meant to you, and, how you taught it and some other things?
Oh, yeah. The class basically, like I said, covered all the way from ancient Africa before slavery, before Africans actually made their way into the mainlands, and it went all the way to recent past. And teaching the course, especially during that time, it was right after the time of George Floyd's murder, and that was part of the reason why it was just such a great opportunity to actually teach the course and teach it for free, just to inform the community, not about that specific event or anything like that, but just give them more information to understand maybe why Black people are feeling the way that they are, why they're protesting, and just give a real substantive overview of African American history in general. It
was the past semester, right? The fall semester. Yeah. How did you think it went over?
I think it went over real well. A lot of the students gave very good feedback. A lot of them said that we covered stuff that they didn't even know about African Americans, and that was on both sides of the so-called racial line. Mm-hmm. Black people learned things that they didn't know about their own race, and then people of other races, white people, found out things that they didn't know. So it was a good course to dispel myths and just uncover some basic truths about African American history.
Yeah. And is this something that you would want to bring back or permanently bring back?
I would like to see it as a permanent thing. It was offered already, but I would probably like to see it more expanded into other courses, maybe have a program of African American studies here. Yeah. I think that would be very beneficial for the students here, considering the demographic of DAC, and just beneficial for the community too. So,
yeah. All right. Well, I think that with that being said, we can jump right into our lesson for today.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll give it away to you.
Today, I was just going to talk a little bit about Carter G. Woodson, and he's known by some for starting Black History Month. He's kind of the reason why we have Black History Month, but he began pretty much in a unconventional but also normal way for African Americans during the time. He actually started out in the coal mines, working now in the coal mines in West Virginia. And like I said, that was common for African Americans to work during those times in industries like the railroad industries, coal mines, and not to have a so-called professional job. So that's pretty much how he started out there. And he actually, during that time, self-taught himself because having to work and support his family somewhat, he couldn't go to school like normal kids would, all the way from all throughout elementary school. So he pretty much self-taught himself all the way from like say K to 8th grade.
Wow.
And so he taught himself how to read, basic math, all the while working in the coal mines there. So and he entered high school at a late age, around 20, and he went through there and he graduated, and then he went on to earn his bachelor's, I think a few years later.
You prefaced by saying that he kind of started Black History Month, that he was one of the main reasons why it is a thing. And could you dive into that? Why is that? What was his?
Yeah, well, while he was going through school, and he went on to actually earn a PhD from Harvard.
Okay.
And that was, I think, in around 1912 he did that. But he was actually the second Black person to earn a PhD. The only one to be before him was W.E.B. Du Bois, which is
that's a familiar name.
Yeah, a familiar name. So he was second only to him as far as Harvard. So he got a PhD in history, and so while he was going through school, he actually discovered that a lot of the history and education pretty much ignored events of Black history, and sometimes just flat out told untruths in Black history. And so that kind of encouraged him to bring Black history to the fore. And so one of the things that he did was he created an organization. It was called I think it was the study of Negro life and history. And he did that with a few other African Americans as well. And then he also started a journal called the Journal of Negro History, which now is called the Journal of African American History, which it's still in publication today. It's a published article. So you can actually search it in a database, and the article that he actually started is still there. But after that, a few years later, he started a celebration of Black history at the school where he was teaching at. That was his job after coming out of, after getting his PhD. But he started a celebration week in February, and he started in February actually to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, kind of just to go around those days, those important dates.
Yeah.
And so that's why we kind of have it in February. It wasn't anything that there's a myth that Black History Month was given to Black people by somebody else, but it was kind of like hymns, and people extended it to a month. And then I think ever since 1976, it's actually been recognized by the federal government as a Black History Month. So yeah, it pretty much started with him.
So I've never heard this before. Can you elaborate on what the misconception was with basically being given February?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a conception, like, you might hear some people say like Black history is given to us or something because it's the shortest month or something like that. But it's, even though it's the shortest month, that's not the origin of it. You know, it's pretty much that, like I said, coincided with the important dates of birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, and started with this individual whose whole life kind of centered around education. And so if we think of it like that, we can kind of link education and Black History Month together.
Yeah. So you said he created the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in Chicago.
Right.
Is there still some form of that still
there's
present?
Yeah, it's still an organization. It's renamed also, the study of African American life, African American history. I mean, and yeah, but it's still they still have functions and do events and things like that.
So, he started a journal, and you said that journal was what?
The Journal of African American History.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so was that his big step into influencing I guess you could call it, or like creating some type of movement or awareness. And, was that his two big steps, is doing these specific things?
Yeah, those were, two of the major steps, along with his just individual publications books that he wrote.
Who were some of Woodson's key influences in creating all of that and like going to Harvard and getting a PhD and just being kind of a trailblazer?
Even like when we talked about him starting out in the coal mines, he was always, even back then when a child, he was always interested in books. He actually collected books in the coal mines, and people around him could see that he had an aptitude or just a hunger for knowledge. So I think that education bug was all in him early.
Yeah.
But I think seeing that African American history was kind of ignored also fueled it. One of his key influences was Marcus Garvey. He's sometimes known as a separatist as far as in the African American history, but he's better known for like encouraging racial pride and encouraging African Americans to actually know their history. And so that kind of influenced Carter G. Woodson to go in that same direction. He was actually a columnist for one of Marcus Garvey's newspapers called the Negro World, which he wrote frequently as, like I said, as a columnist there. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, and so who else, did you touch on this yet, but who else was involved in the development of Negro History Week and Black History Month?
I think before it was just a week, and I think some Black educators and Black students from Kent State, they actually decided to expand it longer than a week to a month, and like I said, then it just went on from there. So.
Yeah. And so he was the second one to earn a PhD from Harvard. Okay, so what are his key influences in doing so, in earning that education, but also using his knowledge past that? He could be another one that just kind of went about and didn't really write and create a journal and create an association, but, he did that. What was behind that?
I think the key idea was just not necessarily an anger, but just a commitment to get out what Black history actually was.
Yeah.
Like during his education, like he self-taught himself, so he's reading books that are pretty much not written by Black people, African Americans, and so and that goes throughout even him getting his PhD. So. That encourages him to do things like write and create these organizations, and also just kind of just critique general education in a way, because he saw throughout him getting his education all the way to his doctorates that there's a need for education to bring to light important African American history and to actually say that it is important. So there you can kind of see an influence from Marcus Garvey, like there's an importance to be knowledgeable of African American history. But one of his books that he actually wrote that probably epitomizes his thought and shows more of his like Marcus Garvey influences is a book that he wrote. It's called Miseducation of the Negro, and you gotta. I'm using Negro. It's back in those times. That's the term that they used back then. But it's called Miseducation of the Negro, and in that book he actually addresses general education and some things that's wrong with that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So if he were to see the education system today and some of the progress it's made or progress that it hasn't made, what do you think he would say about it?
I think he would be somewhat happy about the direction it's going. part of the reasons why we still have African American history courses is because they're generally left out of regular history courses. But I think he would be somewhat happy. But it's I think there's still a way to go as far as that. Just for example, like say in U.S. history, we get taught about like the founding fathers and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and it talks about what they did for the country. And so not to take anything from that, but I think he would also want to bring up that even those figures like Washington and Jefferson actually owned slaves. They had catalogs of books of by name of slaves that they kept, and
Wow.
which slaves were branded, what they looked like, and they were pretty much holistically against freeing their slaves, even when opportunities came up. There's like accounts and quotes from both of those figures saying, they don't want to get rid of slavery. So.
Wow. Okay, so give me a timeline, a time period, because he started this association in 1915, right?
Yeah.
And you
yeah.
said that the first two presidents did have slaves, right?
Right.
So when did this kind of change? When did the time start changing and moving?
Do you mean like
rights for African Americans, and I mean, was his work part of that? How did his work integrate into the change of rights?
Right. I think it's still like at play and at work today, because he started well before like famous court cases like Board versus Education, or well before the early civil rights in the like 40s, and the modern civil rights, which we could say happened like around the 60s with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and some other figures. But he was doing it right around the early 1900s, where you had events like the Red Summer. I don't know if you heard of that, but like it's the Red Summer was an event where there was more than like 26 race riots going on. And not similar, because I would call what we have had, especially in the last summer, more as like protests, but these were like race riots. There was a lot of bloodshed. That's why they actually call it Red Summer, is because so much blood was shed during that time. So he was doing work right around that period. So it wasn't a lot of, there was some progress going on for African Americans, but not a lot during that time. But I think his focus was more on the intellect, the intellectual mind of African Americans, and just trying to remedy or fix the educational problem in the U.S. educational system, and bringing up that African American history is important and needs to be taught. And I think that's very well. It could apply today because we still need that education as far as for African Americans, and so I think it's back then and today he's still like his work is still going on.
It's still being felt.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then some nowadays might call him their key influence. Who were his?
But I think some of his key influence, one of his main key influences would be Marcus Garvey. He really want to create racial pride, and I think he thought that was so important for the African American community, just because he thought that when they are proud about their race, and it's not more like an egotistic pride, but just like a pride of actually knowing how they contributed to American history. It goes past inventions, but actually knowing how they actually shaped America to be what it is. And when African Americans know that, he thought, is that they would also value their worth, their self-dignity, and that would actually help them, even bolster them to fight for just their civil rights, human rights being treated equally, which is kind of hard to do if somebody doesn't have self-esteem, they don't think their race is important. It's
Yeah.
hard to fight for something, for self-worth, if you don't even believe in that basic foundation. So that's one of the key things that he thought was important in making education about Black history so important.
So you have a point on here of his comments to Black and people of all colors. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, like his publication, Miseducation of the Negro,
Yeah.
it was, and you could say it was directly addressed to African Americans, but at the same time, it was you could take it as pretty much an address to just people of all color, and so I think his statements, things like he states about education, like making African American history, bringing that up and making that important. I think that helps not only Black people, but also people of other colors, just not to know exclusively about Black people, but just to know about American history in general. And so I think that's one of the things. And I think he was more of an advocate of American history than probably he's given credit for, because there's comments of him saying things like when we go to school, we're usually given key figures like to study, to write papers on, and it's usually like Caesar, Alexander the Great, Mussolini, or something like that. But I think he would probably say, why are we not trying to write papers on like Frederick Douglass or Ida B. Wells, and who are actually more germane to our life because we're living in America, and they're more germane to how we live day to day. And so I think he's trying to get us to ask those questions, like, why are we not thinking about these people? They're African American, yes, but they're also Americans, and they have a lot to do with why we're here, why we live how we live in.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. So specifically to you, I feel like you know a lot about Carter Woodson, and I feel like you studied him a lot. So what makes you this interested in him over someone like Martin Luther King Jr. or Jackie Robinson or Malcolm X?
I think I became interested in him in knowing his influence of Marcus Garvey, knowing that he didn't come up with this all by himself. Yeah. And Marcus Garvey is kind of a controversial figure, and just kind of seeing why he would be interested in Marcus Garvey. And then also just because I'm in education, I'm a teacher, I was also interested in him and just seeing how he started, and the critique of just education in general. I was just interested in that. I wouldn't say I'm more interested in him in other figures, but I don't know. I'm drawn to him. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He's also interesting figure, but
I think he's interesting. But I've learned about him a lot, and when you brought us this name, I knew absolutely nothing about it. So I'm really glad that you brought, Carter Woodson here to share with us today. I think that was a really, really good idea. We hear about Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a lot, which we should. But I think there are also people like this. And I do have a question. You said that Marcus, who he is, was a little controversial. What do you mean by that?
Sometimes scholars and people that research him, they call him a separatist. There's even some instances of him even trying to talk with what we would call today as white extremist groups to kind of work out a relationship, like, okay, we'll stay separate. I'll be over here, and because what he wanted to do was actually create his own nation of Black people, like just to have a Black nation separate. Wow. And so, but once you start to look at Marcus Garvey, you kind of see the reasons why. It was to kind of instill this racial pride and bolster that. And so seeing Woodson's connection to that, I just wanted to see what parts of Marcus Garvey he picked up on. Was it like those separatist ideals, or was it more like the intellectual, the racial pride type ideals that he got? And so, yeah, it was the latter for Woodson's case.
Gotcha.
So looking into present day to now, what do you think is the most significant way that we have taken the steps forward and made the change and talked about things?
As far as like Black history?
Yeah.
I think having individual courses is a step in the right direction, albeit it's just a step, and I think that's one way to go. I think Woodson, if he was here today, he would probably be more interested in not having individual courses maybe, but actually having textbooks changed, textbooks updated to include the whole history. It might make the textbooks bigger, but it's it's worth it. And so I think that's one of the things he would be interested in, especially for education, and just focusing on African American history as a very integral part to American history, and not just treat it off like a side shot or just a elective course or something like that.
I want to open the floor to you to state anything else that you're thinking needs to be said.
Oh.
I think you seem very prepared.
Oh.
And I want to make sure that you have your opportunity.
Yeah, probably I would probably just say that one of the reasons why it's neat to just look at Carter G. Woodson and just look at his life is, especially during this time, is that it this whole month kind of originated from him. So as we're looking at these different figures in Black History Month, just kind of think about his life and the reasons why he wanted to change education and get Black History Month out there. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in. We had a blast. Learned a lot.
Oh, thank you for having
very
me.
much.
Yeah. Very intrigued now. Might have to go do my own homework. Dive in a little deeper.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for being here. We had a really good time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. This has been the special episode of DACCCAST with Kai and Keegan.
Stay classy, Jaguars.